Think we are running. Let us start Evolution Hour on our day, the 20th of July. Ongoing, what the hell's going on, etc., and so forth and so on. And remember, of course, our exciting crap at tortuganwordpress.com. Available freebie for all to share. Hot here in Spokane. A little bit of delays on that front. Zonked out from the heat, etc., and fun with friends and so forth. So sorry if it's on a little bit late, but we are operational, and we will try to compensate by adding on a third little skivvy in relation to the Surviving Extinction series that's been running on NBC that I've been catching up on some of the episodes that I had recorded. And it sparked some interesting bits about even commercial television can do some really funky, cute stuff with paleontology. Hello there, Lisa. As you know, the main act is going through our stupid old Dwayne Gish creationist books, source by source, to find out what's in there, how much was valid at the time. The geology section that he's finishing off in this chapter, all of the sources are creationist, and multiple dipped too, because he was basically citing a whole swath of stuff in 78, and then he would be citing this material again, C note such and so, where it's basically the same material covering for pages and pages. And then in the 95 version, he decided to up the ante by triple doing them, by actually having a separate footnote that basically lists the same crap over and over and over again. There's going to be some really funky little things in here. Get so tired of explaining what the Save Act is so stupid to people. Yeah. Yes, it's the of a problem that isn't there, that we don't have election fraud in the United States. Every show that there was any serious problem with any on this map failed miserably. But it's a mantra that Trump has to deal with, because Trump, in his little worldview, he can never lose an election. And so if he lost an election, 2020, it had to be because of terrible fraud. So think about this. The Trump administration in power in 2020 let an election be stolen, and the Biden administration in power in 2024 let Donald Trump win the election. What is wrong with this picture? Everything is upside down. But he's a demented old man, and he believes all sorts of claptrap. I think to some extent he's come to believe the stuff that's in his own propaganda. It was just starting out as Roy Cohn lying, which he has done all through his career. But I think in his dementia, he's really come to believe it. And he's surrounded himself with people, Kash Patel and these various other folk, who are true believers in this hypothetical, imaginary voter fraud thing. And the one thing they want to do is to try to hold power permanently. The gang at the Project 2025 bunch would love it if they could so skew things that they will always be in power independent of things. And if we let them get away with it, they'll certainly try. But we mustn't let them get away with it. So make sure you're registered. If impediments are put in your way that make it more complicated to deal with, work your butt off to get around them. In Washington State, we have a nice, simple vote-in system. We get our ballots sent out automatically and the like. Now, whether or not anybody's going to try to end run that by slowing down mail deliveries, I don't have to worry about the voting part, because I drop my vote off at a drop box. I don't have to use the post office. So so long as I have my ballot delivered, which is sent out well in advance, I don't think there's any possible way they can interfere with the way Washington State does things. And to other extent that states that have a similar system, I understand Utah kind of has basically all mail-in voting. If they're running in that same modality, there's nothing they're going to be able to do about it. And then, of course, as our economy and everything else continues to flounder because nincompoop Trump has started this war he ran, don't blame me. I voted for Harris. I am not in the mess of things. So anyway, so the Gish chapter has a bunch of stuff. He's relying on Robert Gentry at times. He's trotting out crusty old George McCready Price. For those of you who aren't familiar with him, he's the old core OC form of flood geology from the Seventh-day Adventists, Ellen White's bunch. And he was one of the big pushers of flood geology back in the 1920s, 30s, 40s, 50s. He gets filtered into things of Velikovsky, drew off of Price and all the rest. As we encounter those, if I can find some of the texts and things to apprise you all of, I'll be putting the links up to that, because it's useful that some of this older crap that often differs in substantive detail from the current crap can be kind of useful. So there'll be three sources that we're dealing with here in the Gish list. Whitcomb and Morris's crusty seminal Genesis flood book from 61. And I think this is a 64 edition or 66, one way or the other. It's at archive.org. You can view it there. It's not available to last. But anyway, for those unfamiliar with the format of like this old 1960s creationism, dive in there and see the difference between that world that's just barely coming out of typewriter mode compared to the kind of hyperlink world and things that we get in the 21st century. The next one is one that I hadn't even heard of, although I knew about him, was Melvin Cook. He's a rare example of an overt creationist Mormon. And I was aware of him because he pops up in the mystery of helium formation and outgassing from the planet and stuff, and kind of circulates at the edges of creationist apologetics. But anyway, Gish is citing him, and in fact, citing him in a 1970 paper that he did on criticizing radiocarbon dating. And we'll be able to put the links up for all of that. Again, archive.org, bless their little hearts, has Cook's 1966 book. And then the 1970 one is at Creation Research Society Quarterly, so you'll be able to get that. The thing that intrigued me about Cook is how fence-straddly it looked for 1966. This is at a time when plate tectonics was on the verge. It really started hitting in. Hello there, Tabula Rasa. For 1966, his section on continental drift is fence-straddly open-ended, and he's sort of thinking that maybe it's triggered off by glaciation, ice ages, bumping rocks and things. So from a point of view of what's actually happening, it's nowhere near plate tectonics. And there's not a huge array of technical citations and things involved in it. He's dangling little bits and pieces. He mentions Piltdown and a few other things. So there's he's tiptoeing at the edges of anti-evolutionism in this. But it does intrigue me that to get a little picture of what Melvin Cook was up to. And of course, the radiocarbon dating material, that's just been an obsession with creationists all along. Radiocarbon dating is particularly funky because unlike the potassium argon and all these other things that are basically only able to measure really old things, radiocarbon is out to the last 50,000 years. Well, some of that relates to just the past period. So creationists are kind of okay with radiocarbon dating out to like the flood time, at which point they need to scrunch everything down to get everything into that previous thing, because they don't have a problem with the radiocarbon dating confirming the date of the Iron Age in Israel. That sort of thing they'd be happy to have. So they're fence straddling on the radiocarbon dating. Now, lower echelon creationists, people you find online, they're just riffing off of quibbles up and down the line. They don't necessarily realize the higher level bits on this. Anyway, another one, old school creationist, Clementson, also from 1970, and Creation Research Society Quarterly, in fact, almost from the same issue. Again, talking about radiometric dating. Also kind of vague on sourcing. And there was a little sidebar that came up on Talk Origins that I'm going to be putting a link up to, which I think is kind of funky, about the fact that they were having trouble figuring out what the hell Clementson was citing and what he was bringing up, because his referencing was so unclear. And this is one of the things that you pop up an awful lot. It popped up just in I finally watched that 5-hour, 40-minute installment of Erica Gutsick-Gibbons' ongoing Let's Try to Persuade Will Duffy About Evolution series. And along the way, Duffy brought up this rock formation somewhere where Cambrian rock was supposedly out of place, unconformably on top of something else. He's very vague about the details. How are we supposed to? Erica was writing down what she could. How is she supposed to check that? It's a very peculiar thing. And at critical junctures, Duffy, and the same thing with Rebecca when Dan Stern Cardinale was trying to explain mutation fixation to her. They're suddenly digging their heels in on supposed problems, but they're remarkably vague on the details of it. I do recommend watching all of Erica's stuff because, of course, she's discussing lots of science material, and also give Will thumbs up for gumption. I mean, he's amiable and he professes to be curious and wanting to learn. So it's an entirely interesting thing to operate. Although you can see points where his brain is just bumping up against boundary layers. The common creationist inability to conceptualize systematics. They can't conceptualize transitional forms. They don't think in population terms. There's a whole bunch of things their brains just seize up on, and they get into a mess on that. Oh, Brian. So anyway, catch all of that stuff. So those little creationist material will be giving some fun stuff on. The regular part 2 that I had related to a neat new paper that just popped up, open access at Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences. Animals have expanded the evolutionary legacy of unicellular ancestors in blood cells. And I thought that was such a cute little thing to deal with on the evolutionary origin of that and how the various cell forms have emerged over time and added on additional components and all that sort of stuff. No doubt, eventually, we can assume somebody at the Discovery Institute and somebody at ICR, AIG, CMI is going to be lighting into this thing because they're not going to like this paper. They're going to have to find some reason to fiddle with it. I'm assuming, therefore, given the fact that Joel Duff follows creationists at that follow the pulse level that I don't typically do, if anybody of them comes up on it, it's very likely he'll call attention to it as well. So I'm going to keep my little radar open on that, and you kids can do that as well. It's going to be rather funky. Fun stuff in here. I'll read the significance of this paper too. This study provides a transcriptome-based model for the evolutionary history of animal blood cells, from emergence to divergence. The initial blood cells emerged in early animals inheriting unicellular ancestors' features, followed by the evolution of mast cells in bilaterian ancestors to fight against parasites. Thereafter, in deuterostome vertebrate ancestors, T/NK cells and erythrocytes, thrombocytes arose from the ancestral mast cells, while B cells evolved from the ancestral macrophages. Along with diversification of blood cell lineages, prototypic thymus formed at the gill edges in chordate ancestors. We finally found a vestige of the evolutionary history in murine hematopoiesis by detecting widely retained macrophage and mast cell potential. These findings shed light on a reciprocal relationship between the evolutionary history and current developmental pathways. Michael Behe ain't going to like that one, given that the blood clotting thing was one of the little blips that he had on irreducible complexity. So one to look forward to. Science marches on, the ability to work out the material on this stuff. I mean, you would have to pity the poor who seriously tries to deal with the incoming data field, because it is so much stuff. I'm going to be fascinated to see what happens to poor Will Duffy's brain when they slam into the hominids and the origins of primates, because unlike the series so far, where she's been describing tetrapods and bird evolution and whale evolution, all sorts of things that are not exactly in her wheelhouse. She's not a geologist. She's not a paleontologist. She freely acknowledges all of that stuff. But when you get down to the primates, that's her wheelhouse, and she can rattle off the details and the bones and the social structure and all of the things at such a technical level that it's going to be fun to see what poor Will can do on this stuff, because there is no counterpart to that level of expertise anywhere in the creationist field. You've got none of them are functionally primatologists. You have ones that write stuff. Peter Line, who I think was either criticized or guest on either Dan Stern Cardinale or Erica had him on a bit, and their attempts to bump into these issues They're lighting into it at the technical level, but that's about it. And so the kinds of arguments we'll be bumping into primate human evolution stuff eventually in the Gish books, and this will be seeing things as it was perceived back in the 1970s and 1990s. Then, of course, we'll also be bringing you up to speed on a lot of the things that have happened subsequently. So the advantage of looking at the Gish books from so long of a distance, 30 years after the last one was done, and 20 years after Gish dropped dead, that we can see how the shelf life lasted. What was the consequences of this? How well have his views fared over time? I have bumped into elements of the reptile mammal transition stuff. And for those who feel like diving into the chapter 3 Dynamania chapter from the old trip work, or you can download 3 macroevolutionary episodes. I covered a lot of that. I reprised a lot of that material in there, but the big longer material is in the Dynamania chapter, where I was going into how Gish was manipulating material, misrepresenting stuff, and all of that. There's been so much work in that since then. For particularly Evolution Slam Dunk, I was able to get so much of the stuff, the primary source technical literature, either because it was available online, or professors and things were able to give me information on it, like Lowe from Carnegie Institute. When I was doing the stuff on Woodmarap and his cladistic stuff, he graciously physically sent me the hard copy of his primary papers and a few others besides. So I was able to access those directly in a way that would have been a little bit more difficult when I was doing the original work back in 2006. So anyway, everybody connects up on that. Find networks of people. Boy, you can do an awful lot. And the more we cross connect, Venu, if we are design question, why didn't we breathe nitrogen? Yeah, well, that's because we are one of those cute little critters that draws off that nasty corrosive oxygen. And aerobic dynamics, oxygen is the danger element that interacts with everything. It corrodes everything. It's the reason why all that iron rusted out. We have all those iron deposits. It's a corrosive, dangerous substance. At the same time, it's a great energy thing. Those cute little 4 hydrogen bonds, chemical bonds around the edges of the atom, can just connect up in the same way carbon. It's no coincidence why we're built out of carbon largely, because you can form long polymers that way. Other elements can't do that. Silicon can't quite operate in that same way, even though it's in a similar row on the or column on the periodic table. So yeah, why didn't we breathe nitrogen? Because things use nitrogen in a very different way and peripherally. You'll be able to get that unicellular roots of blood cells paper from Nagahata et al. 2026, open access, download it, play around with it, throw it at your creationist friends, learn from it. It's just delightful. So a little sidebar that just popped up because I decided I would start watching through the Surviving Extinction series that's on NBC. That it looked like it would be kind of like a commercial version of what the Walking with Dinosaurs and stuff was done, where they were doing digital recreations of paleontological beasts. And the graphics are just gorgeous on it. It's a real fun, zingy things. Because it's on commercial TV, each episode is about like 40 minutes long, something like that, because I got tons of commercials. But it's been a surprisingly zingy thing. Its theme is all about mass extinction events through the geologic record and how life reacted to them and what happened afterwards, and also to some extent connecting up to issues of modern climate research and all that stuff. Oh, design, it would be simpler to use nitrogen since it's the major component in air. Yeah, well, major doesn't mean much. Most of the crust is formed of aluminum in the earth, but it's kind of hard to get at. And making stuff out of it, it has a relatively high melting point. So to smelt it, it took quite a long time. And it wasn't really until the middle of the 19th century that they began to figure out how to make use of aluminum, even though it's fantastically abundant. So mere abundance is not necessarily a factor. Although, take heart, most of your body is 13.7 billion years old, because most of us is made of water, and big chunks of the water are hydrogen, and every hydrogen atom in there was made in the Big Bang. So la-di-da, we all go back 13.7 billion years. Take that, Methuselah. So anyway, So I decided to sit down and watch this Surviving Extinction series, a couple episodes in that today because it's been bloody hot. I don't feel like doing much of anything until like it's cool in the evening, and it's darn good. And so they had stuff on the Permian mass extinction, and they got gorgeous graphics, and they did a good job. It's a summary things, for commercial television and that. So they cut down an awful lot. But the first thing that struck me about it is how many of the individual taxa are really recent critters in terms of the paleontology. These are not a lot of the ones that I'm familiar with from my reading about these topics from years ago. So they're clearly on top of stuff. And like third episode in, they've done a thing on a thing that I knew about back of my head, but whiz bang, they pushed it right into the front because it's one of the lower level extinction events below the big five. And it's the Cenomanian-Turonian Ocean anoxic event during the Cretaceous. It's about 95 million years ago. And I was aware generally about it, but this, by the paleontology and the ecological impacts and all this stuff at a much more precise level. Hello, Vesta. It was a really neat thing, and it caused me to go, I need to look up a little bit on that. And I found a paper from 2022 by Patrizio that's open access, that where they're going into all the stuffs about measuring the foraminifera and all of that to see how global this phenomenon was. And the date is kind of interesting. Remember, we're not talking about the big asteroid splat Deccan Traps extinction, 66 million. No, this is almost 30 million years earlier, when it's almost entirely restricted to ocean critters. And it had to do with the fact that there was a huge amount of volcanism that down in kind of like the New Zealand area. And I think that magma plume is also linked up to why India went boink and boink northwards across the Deccan Traps at the time of the asteroid splat. But what it was doing was really disequilibrating the oceans. First of all, it was the hottest period. So you're having monster hurricanes because ocean levels are warmer. There's an awful lot of anoxic levels. Our oceans are way less anoxic than this period during the Cretaceous. It killed off like half of the marine life in the period. This is before the great big mass extinction that finished off the rest of them. So this apparently is when pliosaurs were checking out, and then afterwards the big marine mosasaurs really take over as an apex predator. They weren't really discussing the ichthyosaurs, which are often farther back in the Triassic, although I think they did survive down as far as some of the Cretaceous in certain zones, and then the plesiosaurs, the long neck versions of the pliosaurs. Oh, went to see Minions and Monsters. It was a fun movie. Had about 20 references to old classic movies. Oh, surprised me. Yeah, Pixar bunch. These are film geeks par excellence, and in a comedy with the cute little minions. It would seem preposterous of them not to do in that front. And in fact, I watched the third Tron Ares sequel, and I'd already seen the other sequel, the second film, based on Tron. And in the second time around, as I was showing it for some friends, the character of Mora, who is a sort of artificial intelligent organism in this world that kind of is self-generated, and a lot of them were exterminated, so there was just one left in the computer world. And the hero, the son of Flynn, in the plot saves her kind of onto like a hard drive and takes her into the real world, but only he can apparently see and hear her. That's the end of the film. Well, I was struck by the fact that when you see Mora's appearance in the modern outer world and he can see her, she's leaning up against a lamppost. And I am virtually certain it's a riff off of Harvey, which is the big invisible rabbit that's quite real, but only visible to certain people, that Elwood P. Dowd first meets when Harvey is leaning up against a lamppost. So I think they've got a little bit of stuff in there. Old movies pop up. It's always fun to see some of these young kids in that when they're watching old movies, by which they mean like a movie from 1985, and they're getting references to stuff, or they're discovering that when they watch Casablanca for the first time, oh, that's where that came from. Well, so it helps to improve the understanding of things, because most people who make serious clever films are aware of the history of stuff, and they're making allusions to tropes. They have connections to Hitchcock and all these other motion picture people that have been made stuff before. And they're going to be inserting all of that stuff, if only to get a little chuckle themselves. Drove to the anoxic creationist ocean yesterday. The earth is black in my area. Yeah, we've got a lot of there's been quite a few fires in our area. There's been some up in Canada. That's been huge fires that have been spilled over. Apparently, Donald Trump doesn't know about wind, so he's complaining about the Canadians sending their smoke down here. There's been fires in our local area last couple of days. There was a time when it got really smoky late at night. I had to close the doors, which I didn't like to do late at night because that lets in all that cool air. But it got terribly smoky, and so we've had some air quality issues. I got a little bit of a rasp in my throat and all that anyway from that. Yes, Harvey, yes. Harvey is a fun one because it doesn't make sense unless you accept that the rabbit is not imaginary. If you try to think that it's just a figment of God's imagination, you will not understand the plot, especially when the guy in the insane asylum there is reading the dictionary definition of a puka, and at the bottom of the sentence it says, "And how are you today, Mr. Wilson?" that he's put in a reference to the guy reading the book in the dictionary. Suddenly, Canada should charge America for all the free smoke. Yeah. Well, we'll see. We'll put a tariff on the nitrogen. We can put the tariff on the nitrogen. Why not? Let's go the Trumpian route for insane economic policies. Anyway. This particular episode on this Cenomanian Turonian oxygen episode was really fascinating, illuminating, because I think it did a really good job of putting everything into a clear perspective of what was going on, not only with these monster hurricanes that were taking place, but the fact that because there were these anoxic levels in a lot of the areas of the ocean, you had dead zones in the water. And then the heat had a very different dynamic. It's part of the reasons probably why these great big marine reptiles were able to work so effectively in that environment, because the oceans were quite warm. And this is in contrast with the very different dynamic that's taking place in our world, where we have much colder oceans and really great oceanic, relatively few anoxic zones involved, much better mixing. And so we're just rich with plankton and little critters and stuff all floating all over the place. And that's how you can get monster baleen whales and all of that are vastly bigger than any counterpart that anyone has ever found out of any marine reptile. The biggest marine reptile predators are all in about the same 50-foot length mass range as sperm whales. That's true of the biggest ichthyosaurs, it's true of the biggest pliosaurs, and it's true of the largest mosasaurs. So there's kind of like an upper dynamic range going on there. But for the air quotes herbivore versions like the baleens, our oceans can pull off a thing that maybe there would have been a circumstance where some form of a reptile might have developed into that if ocean chemistries had changed radically while they were still around, but that didn't happen. So there we go. So we'll be putting that cute little paper up that you can look at for all the bits on. It's essentially dealing with precisely stuff around in the Indian Ocean, and it's involving foraminifera and radiolarians and all this kind of stuff that are measuring ocean temperature chemistry and all of that in one go. And it's a very intricate thing. And then, of course, there's side references that are alluding to other issues along the way, which you can follow up as your design. But I thought it was kind of funky to plug that little thing in, and I can highly recommend. I don't know how many more episodes there is to the thing, and I'm sure a lot of public libraries will have access to it, and it may be streamed. I'm not sure about that point. But anyway, it's fun to watch, and the graphics are absolutely magnificent on it. I was very impressed with like the little cute little feathered tyrannosaurids up in the Arctic, and all the little bits and little baby dinosaurs and little mammals straying around all over the place. But what struck me is how so many of the taxa so far are unfamiliar to me. They're ones that are just recently found critters that are opening up new boundary layers on there. Oh, giant aquatic reptiles live at the same time as dinos? Yes, indeed they did. They're coming on the scene. The earliest ones, the ichthyosaurs that are kind of reptilian versions of dolphins. They're Where's my? They're the same. Reaction time here is to hide show. But so if you think about the whole Mesozoic period is Triassic, Jurassic, Cretaceous, and the Triassic, the dinosaurs in the late Triassic, remember, okay, before that, the Permian period, which is when the big reptile-mammal transition was already going on, and then you get the Siberian traps and the biggest mass extinction in history, blah, blah, blah. The ancestors of the little dinosaurs were tripping around in this same period, but are really peripheral. And towards the tail end, after the Permian mass extinction knocks so many of the synapsids out of the picture, and the things reconfigured. Pangea is still in kind of semi-breakup mode at this period. It's a lot of arid deserts. There's high mountain things. They went into a lot of that in the thing on the Permian mass extinction. That would be refuges in an otherwise very dry planet. Well, when you hit the Triassic, proliferation of stuff. The pterosaurs appear during this period. The ichthyosaurs are coming along during this period, and the pterosaurs are very small, like crow-sized things, not the great big pteranodon, Quetzalcoatlus kind of things that we're seeing, those big monster glider types that are appearing much later on in a highly derived form. And towards the very end of the dinosaur, or of the Triassic, you find a fairly sudden proliferation of relatively small groups of dinosaurs. They're all little small teeter-totter theropody-shaped kinds of things, whether there's probably some ornithischian dinosaurs around in the same period, but they really get their leg up and start doing things in later periods. But they're probably there. And you've got those cute little Herrerasaurs that are sort of like Cirricians, sort of like ornithischians. And there's still dispute taxonomically as to how close they are and whether or not we should have sauropods over on a side lineage and all that. It's because in their early stages, these all critters look a hell of a lot alike. So trying to sort out all the lineages and that based on very, very precise cladistic analyses is a fun thing to do because we don't have a huge amount of deposits. And the Triassic period, in fact, you've only got just a handful of a really big one. I think there's the Ishogalasto in in South America, and there's a couple others. So you don't have a huge amount of things to play with to get data points. And then in the Jurassic, things continue. That's when all the major dinosaur forms have started to get crystallized. You start getting big things. You get the big sauropods. You get the allosaurs and that. The tyrannosaurs are later on in the Cretaceous. You're getting the groups that are starting to work into what we're going to be seeing later on with ceratopsids and that third group that's occupied in the Cretaceous. So does that help there? It's a long time ago by our standards. Yeah. So you've got roughly the Permian or the Triassic period from about late Triassic, about maybe 220 million years ago. So it's about 150 million year run from them down to the mass extinction part. And we made a point of putting a chart on all of that. Good reason for getting the rocks were there because we have all of that geologic material conveniently organized with the little dates on there so you can keep track with the latest date structure from the big 2013 paper that was done coordinating all the dates as best we can. So anyway, and of course, you've got such a range. What's intriguing, one, is as far as we know, there ain't no marine dinosaurs. There may have been, and it's not preposterous to imagine the thing, but as Vermeij, who is a blind paleontologist, which always amazes me, absolutely extraordinary, wonderful paleontologist. At any rate, he pointed out in one of his books that when you get critters that fill a niche, it's harder and harder for other critters to come in and invade that niche. So a group of these various reptile forms are adapting and becoming apex forms in the marine environment contemporaneously with the very earliest active dinosaurs. And so effectively, the niches are getting filled. So whether or not it was just a peculiarity of the dinosaurs just having the bad luck of the draw, or whether or not their anatomy was such that they really couldn't adapt easily to water, swimming, fine, they could do that just fine. But actually fully aquatic forms, whereas crocodiles developed fully aquatic forms during the Mesozoic with flippers and the whole 9 yards. And then, of course, you got mosasaurs that are kind of related to snakes. And you've got the pliosaurs and plesiosaurs and ichthyosaurs. So it's a bunch of marine reptiles that are doing just fine in varying forms all through the Mesozoic, and yet no dinosaurs, no fully aquatic ones. Now, you might argue that it was a very rare circumstance that meant that only a niche group of their warm-blooded bird descendants, like penguins and that, can become very effective aquatic zone animals, even though they don't spend all of their time on there. They waddle around and make little farty noise and drop poop a lot down there in Antarctica. But they are very agile in the water. And maybe it needed to have the elements of the feather structure and the glands that get the oil and all that kind of stuff to make them functionally waterproof. And there's a whole bunch of little variables that are maybe difficult to pull off for dinosaurs, and that could account for why, although the warm-bloodedness, the water temperature shouldn't have been a problem on it. But at any rate, that's an interesting little puzzle, and it's way above my pay grade to be able to be pontifical about it. But anyway, it intrigues me that there are no aquatic dinosaurs. Saltwater crocs have been seen way farther south than normal. They are becoming sea creatures. Well, the crocodiles that we know, caimans and all the rest, are a tiny little remnant of the huge diversity of crocodiles. And so the notion that a lot of creationists have, and we've alluded it in the various books, that they're some kind of a living fossil is really a superficial and misleading circumstance, because the crocodiles had a huge dynamic. There were the Lagasucids, which were rabbit crocs that had relatively long legs, fast sprinters, all that kind of stuff. And of course, some of the monster ones like Deinosuchus and that, were dinosaur munchers. They were 50-foot long things, way bigger than any crocodiles that we have today. I think its ocean temperatures are higher. They like that warm water. Yeah, there will be adaptations of things. I mean, as the way we keep up things, we'll have a different dynamic going on in the Arctic Ocean because of less sea ice. More lanes. We'll finally have a Northwest Passage in there, and then the Canadians and the Russians and everybody else can have conniption fits over the resources in there. Maybe some hot wars will happen. Maybe the Canadians will show their pesky side and politely tell you to buzz off with some cannon shots. Greenland may become green, and the British wine industry, I think, has been helped along by global warming. They were able to grow grapes back during the medieval warm period, and can do so again. So we got a lot of things that are happening. Of course, one of our friends was just over in Londonlessly hot, whereas the rest of Europe is baking in terrible heat waves. So along the Mediterranean, Spain and Greece and all that, and they have wildfire problems. They were just interviewing some Portuguese firefighters who were talking about the difficulties they were having. They're facing the same problems that we do about the dangers of trying to squelch fires when you need to be able to let the natural fire cycles clear stuff. But then again, how do you stop them from causing too much damage? So they're having to learn all of the same lessons that we're learning at our peril here in the United States. Gosh, isn't that fun? So anyway, it's 84 degrees in my den. The outside temperature is like 64. We're going to be in the 90s at least for the next few days, so long as we can avoid too many fires and that sort of thing around the area. Well, not too bad. At least we have low humidity here in Spokane. Just to put it into perspective, 95 here would feel kind of like what maybe 70 might, or 65 even, if you were in like Chicago or North Carolina. That high humidity when I've been in the East is just absolutely saps you. So our dry heat is rather handy down in here. So as Antarctica has new deep warm currents, no telling what all changes will make the local life. Yeah, although we know lots and lots about ocean circulation systems, there's also a lot we don't know. And just exactly how layers and thermoclines can suddenly state change in ways that are unpredictable and sometimes maybe irreversible Do we know down at the mechanistic precise level exactly how our ocean systems function? No, which is why we should be damn careful and reluctant about putting our finger on the scales and altering the dynamics of things without knowing what the effects of things are. If we had an absolutely perfect knowledge of these things, but it's highly likely we can never have an absolutely perfect knowledge. How analogous do you think the Permian global warming is to our current? Oh, well, the Permian thing was driven by monster volcanic eruptions. I mean, there's nothing on the planet that coincides with what was going on in the Siberian traps, where you have functionally like a third of Asia going off like continuous Malaysian volcanoes for a million years or more. So it produced an enormous amount of not only noxious gases, the carbon dioxide stuff, but also sulfuric oxide and all of this kind of stuff. So it was a acid rain elements. There's a lot of crap that's going on. The planet has been as warm in terms of CO2 levels and also in terms of overall temperatures like this before. But the point is that this has not been the norm for human beings living with agriculture. This is getting into be hot territory. Even if one of the stupider things that comes out of a lot of the climate denier camp is that, well, more carbon dioxide means more plants because the plants love the carbon dioxide and then they produce more oxygen and everything is happy, happy, joy, joy. But it don't do any good whatsoever about happy plants if the happy plant can't get happy because there's a drought and the thing drops dead, or it gets rained on at the wrong time and rots away in your field. And that's what has been happening more and more in places like Kansas and other areas where the weather is becoming stressful for doing crops. And it can be a disastrous element. Then, of course, anyone that is building off of irrigation systems, like the people that are all feeding off of the Colorado River, that Colorado River system is drying down to where the lake levels, water levels at Lake Mead and all that are just really low. It was low when I was visiting down there in 2021, and I'm going, whoa, okay. Whenever I go over to the coast, I always watch. There's a big reservoir. It doesn't serve the place where my niece lives, but nonetheless, it's part of the water supply system for a lot of people in the Seattle area. And I noticed the level of the thing from how much the snowpack has retrieved it, and it's been getting lower and lower and peskier and peskier. There was very little snowfall this year to refill all of that. Not all like plants are CO2 either. Some actually don't do well in high CO2. Yeah, and then there's also the issue that plants, if they live in like altitude gradients and the temperature changes, they have to move farther up the mountain, for example, but they can get stuck there now. And because they're on a mountaintop, they can't get to somewhere else and they can go extinct. If the temperatures continue to rise, there's nowhere for them to go. So there's a bunch of complex interconnected dynamics. Some things, some corals will be able to handle higher temperatures, others won't. There's a whole bunch of variables going on. There's not a one size fits all. But the point is that you'll have enough dynamic change that the old ways of living and doing things comfortably may disappear. And of course, whether or not we reach some catastrophic tipping point where if like the plankton oxygen generations in the sea starts breaking down, then that can be a terrible mess. And the problem is that these nincompoops in the Trump administration and in some other countries would have that level of dumb. They can delay and diddly. The Republicans have been diddling for a very long time, to the point where now our options are getting narrower and narrower because the things that would have been relatively easy to adapt to 50, 60 years ago are increasingly more difficult because now we have to have bigger compensatory mechanisms. Structurally, I'm very wary of anything that's trying to do a technological fix like a CO2 scrubbing and things like that to pull things out, because that's a technological fix that just connects you to another technological thing that you have to pay attention to. Homeostatic systems where nature is doing its cycle in ways that you don't have to monitor is much more stable in the long run, and we're putting our fingers down on too many little things in this area. We're not doomed yet. But nonetheless, our options are becoming trickier to deal with. Europeans are going to have to deal with more air conditioning. That means more electric use. That means more power plants. So then they are having to compensate for that issue. How do you do that in a green way? And a lot of these states are now, New York just was doing a thing. We're getting to put the brakes on here in Washington on these energy water hogging data centers. That do we really need way more AI chatbot things to tell us about claptrap when I look up Google and the little chatbot wants to, or I'll even open up a PDF and the little thing says, "Ooh, this looks like a long argument. Would you like the AI to give a summary for you?" No, I can read, you nincompoop. I don't need your assistance. Thank you very much. And if I've reached the point where I'm using that as a crutch in lieu of thought, nah, that's not a good idea. So there we are. Potholer did a nice breakdown of the different plant groups, like CO2, not like CO2. Oh, yeah. Oh, that's a neat one. Yes, I'll have to look at that. Potholer gets several mentions along the way in Rocks for Their Volume 2. In fact, I was just dealing with the section because he did just a absolutely delicious video breaking down the creationists' population models after the flood and how they try to have it both ways because they have to accommodate how fast you need to grow to get the current population. At the same time, if you have that fast of a growth rate, how it starts out very few people, no matter what you look at. You only got 8 people coming off of the ark. So how fast do you have to grow to get enough people to do things like building pyramids and stuff, which, by the way, they have to move the entire Egyptian culture down past the flood. It's a mess. And the numbers are never going to add up all of it. Yeah, Potholer does some stuff. He's done excellent material criticizing Graham Hancock and climate science deniers and various people who have woo all over the place. Plus the wonderful accent. Just love it. Anyway, oh, yes, yeah, entomologist. I think Potholer's a geologist. That's his main training, but he's a source methods guy. He wants to see primary source papers to see what the actual technical material is and look at the actual technical details. And as we know, Tortugan mines get into big problems when it comes to the technical details. And that if they're venturing a faulty view of things, you'll find it out the moment you start diving into the technical source material. So anyway, good gravy. 47 minutes of me jibber jabbering, and I need to put our thank you notes up for our dear people who have stuck with the old RJ all of this time with our patrons. And then we need to share screen, blah, blah, blah. There we go. Get my little menu over there. And zot. Thank you all much, our colleagues and researchers and assistant researchers and friends and legacy patrons, folk like dear Ian Chen from down in Australia way, and Apologia and all of the other folks around in there. Slava, I haven't heard from in quite a while. He's in the Ukraine zone, so I'm sure hope he's hanging on in there. There's an awful lot of people who live in much murkier places than my little neighborhood in Spokane, Washington. At any rate, thank you all for holding on to the thing, helping out as best we can. There's an awful lot of people shaking an awful lot of cans. I'm not in the situation where my livelihood totally depends on the Patreon matter, where there are a lot of people like Dapper Dino and others that functionally this is their living. They're making off of it. A lot of Erica has noted that the kind of revenue that they're getting in terms of her videos, and that helps a need because of government funding cuts on grants at universities and a lot of other stuff going on in there. So I, as a retired old fart on Social Security, have to some extent a different dynamic going on in here, which even though at times it's squeaky making ends meet, I don't have to worry about quite a lot of the cross-connecting and also ass-kissing that would be the case if I were still in academia or in academia. Or in the regular business world. So who would like to fruit fly would be bio or entomologist. Yeah. Okay. So anyway, let's put our little advert up for Rocks for Their Volume 1. I notice also that practically every time I'm opening the window for the Restream, they've changed the menu structure and they keep moving little things around, and I have to get used to where the screen is on stuff, you know. So just can't they stick with a menu and go with it, kids? I really think that would be preferable, but maybe that's too much to ask these days. Oh well. And let's get that going, and we see whether or not we are in fact visible, and that looks like we are. And let us kick it off. The Rocks Were There, Volume 1. And that's that. Rocks Were There, Volume 2. We are crossing our fingers that we can get that out before the end of the year. We've got my task is I'm a verbose bastard, and there's an awful lot of material that I ended up writing, contributing to the various chapters that I have to figure out exactly how to condense and structure so that we don't miss anything, but still will fall within the page structure, because we were pushing up against the envelope as to how big Rocks Were There Volume 1 was. And there's been so much more material, and we're tackling such massive subjects that haven't really been covered by a lot of people, like the cosmological stuff. Typically, astrophysicists have more on their plate than going after creationists, so this is kind of fresh turf in that area. But anyway, it's a daunting task to do, but we are endeavored to do it. So we will accomplish what we can. So everybody stay super duper safe. Watch out for the wooden penguins. Keep your powder dry. And as we all melt here in our temperatures, we will see you all next week. Another Luskin week. Spoiler alert, we're probably not going to get any papers that are going to confirm their view of junk DNA. Oh, well. La-di-da. So everybody stay super safe and keep your powder dry, and we will be seeing you next week.